All right, this is going to be a crazy true law stories. We're going to talk about one NFL player's house of horrors. We're going to talk about HOA fights, chairs being thrown, and this great attorney, Greg Eisinger, almost got punched in the face. Greg, say hi.
Hey, everyone.
No black and blue marks on him. Why he has to have the riot police at some of these. One of Greg's first condo association meeting at 10 years old. This crazy admission by one building inspector and the problem with emotional support animals. All this on True Law Stories. It's going to be an exciting one. But of course, this is brought to you by videocasestory.com, one of the best ways to promote your business, your law firm, your doctor's office is through Video Case Stories. Go to videocasestory.com to learn more. All right, let's get started. These are some of the craziest stories that you'll hear ever, and HOAs are nuts, condo communities are nuts, community associations, and Greg's been doing it for a while. Greg, before we get into the stories of talking about, riot gear and chairs being thrown and all these nuts things, how did you get into community association law?
Well, because international law was already had too many attorneys. No, I'm kidding. My father actually has been a condominium or a homeowner association attorney for about 30-something years now. So I grew up around the industry. It's always interested me. He used to take me to meetings as a kid, and I knew I always wanted to be an attorney. And actually, I was interested in international law. I did a study abroad program in the Czech Republic. But when push came to shove after law school was done, I decided, you know what, I'd rather work with my father. And I knew a lot about the industry. And I ended up here.
That's fantastic. So what is involved? What are you doing when you're working with community associations, HOAs, et cetera?
So I actually teach association law at Nova Southeastern University. And the first thing I tell my students or ask my students is to list the types of areas of law that association law involves. And they start saying things like, well, contract law, because you're reviewing contracts. And then they say, well, there's some governmental law because you deal with how governments interact with the HOAs. And by the end of me going over this with the class and people raising their hands, we have about 20 or 30 different types of areas of law, whether it's contracts, government, and basically criminal law, which I'm sure we'll get into. It's basically a mini government. So anything that you can think of, collection law when you're collecting homeowner association assessments. There's really so many different things I do on a day-to-day basis, whether I'm attending meetings or drafting agreements or negotiating contracts. It's really different almost every single day. And the amount of issues that come up, I may see something tomorrow that I haven't seen in my first, 11 years practicing in this area.
I'm sure. So tell me about, that was something we didn't talk about before. You went to these meetings as a child?
Yes. Yeah. I think I was probably about 10 years old when I first went to my first association meeting. I think, my mom was busy that night. My dad said, you got to come with me to this meeting. And I remember, getting ushered in because there's people yelling from the sides when we're walking in. Oh, that's the attorney. Actually, it was in South Miami, so they're all screaming "Abrigado," and we're walking in, and I'm like, Dad, what is this? And people are yelling left and right, and I thought it was just the most wild adventure I took as a kid. And from that day, I there's a lot of yelling and whatnot, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching my father work and try and calm the room and, explain the law to people. And there were some people that were not happy with what he was saying. Other people were, cheering him on. But I went to a few meetings as a kid.
And what point did you say, I'm going to do this? It was like, what was I know you said there was a lot going on international, but was there one point you're like, I really need to do HOA law?
Throughout growing up, I said, this is something I'm definitely interested in. And when I started learning about, let me explore some other options, international law or business law, I decided, homeowner associations and condos they have a little bit of everything. And I probably right about as I was taking the bar, I said, I think I really want to be a association attorney. And after the bar, I passed the bar and I came and started working for Eisinger Law.
What was the first case that made you rethink being an association attorney?
The hardest part of my job is when we do collections. So when people don't pay their condo or HOA dues, then obviously the association has to take action. And you can foreclose. Many people don't know this, but you can foreclose and take someone's home. The association takes the home if someone doesn't pay the assessments. They're essentially taxes. So I've dealt with a few tough cases where I've had to, essentially do collection work and remove people from homes that couldn't afford their homeowner association assessments. And while I feel terrible, I have a soft spot in my heart for people that lose their homes that can't pay for their assessments. If the people don't pay, that means the other people in the association have to make up for that deficit. So, if you can't afford to live somewhere, then you end up losing your home, and it's a hard part of my job. So sometimes I think about that type of stuff and I want to do something else, but you know what? That's all areas of the law have some tough aspects to it.
Yeah, but yours has a lot of tough aspects. So let's talk a little bit about the riot gear or the riot police being at one of your meetings.
So actually, that was a fun one that happened this year. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Surfside tragedy, but the building that collapsed and it was a terrible tragedy. It collapsed because, that association, and there's a lot of things that have been said about the reasons it's collapsed, but the fact is associations are run by a board of directors. They're not professionals. They're unpaid volunteers, and they're the ones that have to manage a building. And some of these buildings are 30, 40 years old, and they're falling apart. And if the board doesn't take the necessary actions to make sure that the concrete is sound and the other issues with the community, with the buildings are intact, then a building could collapse. So what the legislature has done recently, and not even just the legislature, some of the local governments down here have started enforcing some of the rules to make sure that buildings are not going to collapse. So they're doing more inspections. They're making sure the roofs are sound and the structures are sound. And basically, I went to a meeting where the board of directors had to pass a special assessment. This association didn't have any reserves to pay for a new roof and to do some concrete restoration work. So it's a lower income community. And they basically were passing a special assessment where everyone in the community was going to have to pay a few $1,000s to perform necessary work, or the building was going to be condemned and everyone was going to have to vacate. So I arrived at the meeting and I explained the situation to about 50 people at the pool area. And it was a predominantly Spanish community. So as I'm explaining it, and there's a translator next to me, the translator starts telling me, Greg, they're saying some not nice things. And, I think everything's fine. I'm explaining the situation. If you don't do this work, you're all going to be kicked out of your building. You're not going to get insurance, yada, yada. Well, sure enough, the translator keeps translating back and forth, and then a chair comes flying in. And I have to duck. And I immediately look, and I brought an assistant. I said, please call the police. And for the next 10 minutes, it was me and the property manager protecting two elderly board members as people are rushing up, just screaming in our face. We have spit flying. The chair came in. I'm just fending off, the people to try and protect my two elderly clients. And then about 10 minutes after our call to the police, about 8 police with the riot gear, the big riot gear work where they come in with the protective gear, and they start pushing the people back because we're just, kind of just pushing people. I'm getting people grabbing my shirt, and the riot gear or riot police push everyone back. They grab us, they get us to the car, they grab the board members, they get them safely home, and we get out of there.
Oh, wow. Was that the scariest moment in your tenure?
About 6 months before that.
Oh my God, that's not the scariest one.
Yeah, I've been to probably about 4 meetings where there's been physical altercations involving myself, where someone came up to me and either, pushed me about 6 months prior, very similar situation where I had to explain to a group of 100 why the association needs to raise their assessments. And one guy walked up and just threw a punch right at me. And I dodged it, brushed my shoulder. And then at that point, everyone is getting rowdy, but people in the audience start fighting with each other because there's people that obviously understand the issues and need, understanding that they need to raise funds so they don't lose their property, their units. So they start fighting with each other. But after I get a punch thrown at me, I back off and I took the president away because there was another elderly lady, and I took her and I escorted her out and made sure she got home, and I left that meeting as well. That one I thought, luckily the guy, after he threw that punch, backed off. But that one I thought I was going to, have to do something I haven't done since grade school.
Oh my God. So are you taking self-defense classes now?
No, I like to think of myself as a pacifist. Generally, at meetings where I believe there's going to be issues, I require the board and the property management company to hire off-duty police officers. I've done that at a dozen or so meetings, and there was one meeting where I had off-duty police officers sitting next to us, and still someone ran up with a chair and launched it at one of the board members, and he was arrested at the meeting, brought out, and they called the police to actually arrest him for assault and battery. So I know I should have known better for these last two meetings, and moving forward, even if I believe there's any chance, I'm going to require police officers to be at these meetings.
Yeah, I don't blame you. In general, what do you think is the cause of all this angst at these HOA meetings and condo meetings and association meetings?
The most important one, the biggest one, especially recently, and as I was getting into, associations now more than ever need to start specially assessing, raising their assessments. Insurance has raised, I think, on average 30% over the last few years for associations. I had one association raise about 400% this year. So it's over money. It's, hey, we need more money from you. Well, we need to do the roofs. We need to get insurance. And when you tell people they need to pay more money that can't afford it, that generally causes the most problems. But also, next to family law type issues, these are property issues. You're dealing with your neighbors. You're dealing with something that you're always involved with. So you have a home next door that's constantly having parties, and you want to live peacefully, and you just have noise coming from your unit above or whatever. It just causes people to obviously be very upset more than other types of law. And at these meetings, it generally boils over when, people are yelling at each other. And I hear worse horror stories sometimes when the attorney isn't there because, then the property management companies or property managers or the board members are the ones that are trying to, explain these situations and regulate issues. And it causes people to be a little erratic.
You have to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have HOA, actual homeowners associations. And if we're talking a little bit about one story where you had an NFL player's house of horrors.
The House of Horrors case, yes. It was 5-6 years ago. An ex-NFL, pretty good player, actually. One of my childhood heroes, I like to say. And he lived in a community. It was a very, very nice community. And actually, he didn't live there, but he owned a house there. And he didn't maintain his house. So the residents in the community used to call it the House of Horrors. And obviously, if you live in an HOA, you expect the HOA to make sure that all the properties are kept up to a certain condition. You buy into an HOA for multiple reasons. And one of those reasons is you want to keep property values high. You don't want the house next to you to be painted pink. And you don't want the yard to be overgrown with weeds and the windows to be punched out and whatnot. that lowers your property value. So this house was the house of horrors. And we sent a letter and said, Mr. So-and-so, I'm not going to reveal his name. These are your about 10, 15 violations. You need to correct these because your governing documents require you to maintain your property to a certain standard. And sure enough, he actually picked up the phone and gave me a call, and in some not very nice terms told me I can't force him to do anything, and he owns that property and he can do whatever he wants with it. So the association said, do what you need to do to bring him into compliance. So we filed the necessary lawsuit, and it basically was a lawsuit saying, mow your yard, mow your yard and fix your windows. And, the roof is literally falling off, at some point. Your pool is green. You got to just take basic care of your property. And he hired an attorney. I think he hired multiple attorneys. And
wouldn't it be cheaper just to get it fixed?
Well, at the end of the story, yes. It was a 3-day trial where we had to present, evidence from this is every single other house in the community. We're not selectively enforcing this property. We had to bring in a lot of evidence. He threw everything he can at me. At every single stage, he would, hey, Mr. Eisinger, I think I'm up 14-7 right now. And he used every, football analogy in the world. And, he tried to use, I believe, his political weight of being a football player in court, the amount of times he kept mentioning he's, is a football player. And $110,000 of legal fees later, the judge awarded the association the win, gave an injunction that said he had to comply with, about 10 different things to his property within a certain amount of time. And he had to pay all of the association's legal fees, $110,000. And sure enough, he came to my office a few weeks later, handed me the check, shook my hand, and said, "Good game." It was a game to him, but it was also a good experience. And I tell my clients this story, and I tell unit owners this story of people that don't think the association has any power to make sure that you're complying with their governing documents, because they do.
They do. They do. Oh, that's crazy. And you've had some other crazy stories too, haven't you? I was looking here. We've got one about a deposition with the city inspector of a flooring issue.
This was one of my more bizarre cases and depositions. I represented an association, a affluent association on the beach. And the dispute involved a floor. One unit owner below said, "Hey, I hear everything coming from the unit above. The flooring must not be per code." And we went back to the association records, and the individual submitted the plans. They submitted the approval from the city. So we said, hey, they have all the permits. They have everything they're supposed to get. The flooring is approved. I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. Well, like most cases, the association was sued in addition to the unit owner with the subject flooring. And I said, you know what? This is going to be simple. We're just going to interview the inspector who went in and issued the permit and inspected the flooring. And sure enough, that inspector will be able to, corroborate that the flooring was done properly. So I asked a very simple question to start, the deposition. And I said, Mr. City Inspector, can you tell me your qualifications of inspecting flooring? I have none. So, much to my shock, obviously, I said, well, can you elaborate? Were you the individual that came out to inspect this flooring? He said, yes. And I said, well, once again, then what were you inspecting? He says, I'm not really sure. I usually go out to just make sure that the flooring is put in. And to me, that blew my mind, because I wasn't, I guess, I'm having the correct understanding of what building inspectors do and why permits are necessary. But he essentially testified that he had no experience in inspecting flooring. He didn't inspect to make sure the flooring was installed properly. He just was inspecting to make sure that the flooring was put in, and that was basically it. It blew my mind. Sure enough, the flooring, failed the sound inspection test. And so in my opinion, I guess people were just paying this particular city a permit for absolutely no reason, because they never inspect to make sure that the flooring is actually to code or to a specific standard. They just collect the permitting and make sure that some flooring is installed. So that was one of my more bizarre depositioning cases. And honestly, going back to Surfside, it's a sad tragedy, but I hope it was a wake-up call to cities to actually train inspectors to go and know what they're looking for when they're looking at concrete or serious issues, to make sure that the buildings are, in fact, doing what they need to do to have sound structures and whatnot.
And, I think the final thing I want to talk to you about is fake emotional support animals in buildings. Because, I've been on planes, and you're like, I know that's not an emotional support animal. I can tell that was ordered from Amazon. It was like, how big of a problem is this, and how often are you seeing it, and what are you doing about it?
Well, I got to clarify the term fake, because the way the law works is if you have a disability as defined by the Fair Housing Act, essentially it could be anxiety or depression, then you can go to a doctor and say, doctor, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have a pet, and it helps me cope with these, my issues. Well, that doctor can certainly then prescribe you to have an emotional service animal. And that's different than a service animal, which you may be thinking of, which is an animal that's there to provide a specific service. The best example being a seeing eye dog. The person's blind, the dog is trained to help him see. So it's pretty easy to tell that person needs that animal. But when it comes to an emotional support animal and a disability that's, there's no real way to say, hey, does that person really have anxiety or depression? And then really in today's day, who doesn't have anxiety or depression? So the real issue is not, are they fake? It's, if you're living in a community that's a no pet community, and it's just that easy by the law to go out to any doctor, you can go to a darn podiatrist if you wanted to, and he can write you a emotional support animal letter. And the law basically says if that letter contains, the three qualifications that you suffer from the disability and the animal's going to help you cope with that disability, then you have no choice as an association or housing provider but to allow that pet into the building. So I don't call them fake letters necessarily. I call them sometimes just a ridiculous policy that the association can't get around. And I have communities that have 30 units and it's a no pet building, and 20 of the units have emotional support animals. And the other 10 people are furious because they want to move into a pet building, a no pet building. And because of this law and because of how easy it is to obtain emotional support animals, and if you deny the emotional support animal and they went out and properly got the documentation, then you're going to get a fair housing complaint and you're going to get a big penalty, and it's not worth it to deny these. So it is causing a major, major problem in this industry and in other industries as well. I believe the airline industry just recently passed some type of law which makes it harder to bring in emotional support animals into airlines.
Yeah, like snakes.
Like snakes, look, I have communities that have had to let in chickens and snakes and all these types of animals as emotional support animals. And, do I think a lot of these people are abusing the system? Sure. But then again, who doesn't have anxiety or depression, and who doesn't get an animal for those reasons. I certainly am not. I didn't get my pets to look at me and kind of judge me all day. I got them to make me feel better. And when I come home from a stressful day, I look at my pet, and it does take away some of my stresses in life. So I understand the need for pets, but in my opinion, the government needs to do a better job regulating this industry, and has to come up with a more reasonable solution than, hey, anyone that has some anxiety or depression can just get this reasonable accommodation to the no pet policy and bring in whatever pets they want.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I have two things to expound on there. A, I didn't know your pets aren't supposed to judge you, because I have 3 cats that definitely judge me and don't provide any emotional support. And B, I've seen some of these, okay, cute, cuddly, calm dog. Yes, that's emotional support. But like I see people like those rabid, animals, or like emotional support orangutan that's crazy. I'm like, that rips people's faces off. I'm like, come on. So, but it is a crazy gray area, and I appreciate your understanding of it. It's just it's such an interesting thing, man.
So one thing to add on that though, if you have a dog, an emotional support animal that is an animal that's causing a nuisance in the community, it's barking all day, it's attacking people, or not on the leash, or not complying with reasonable pet policies, then you could have that animal removed. It doesn't matter if it's an emotional support animal. The competing interest, and I have successfully removed a few emotional support animals, via action with courts or the DBPR, the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. I have gotten those animals removed, even though they have the emotional support animal letters.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, because if there are nuisance, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure if someone enters into a no pet building, especially if they have allergies and stuff, that's a conflict of interest, isn't it?
That was one of the reasons I had one of the pets removed. It was the person below had severe allergies, and the person above got the emotional support dog. And as soon as that dog moved in, because they all share similar airflow, that the person's allergies just kicked in severely, and we were able to remove that dog.
Oh, yeah, it makes sense. But this is crazy. This is fun. Definitely want to have you back with more of these stories sometime. But if someone needs help with their HOA, with their condo community, with their association, what's the best way to get in touch with you all?
You can visit our website at eisingerlaw.com. It has our phone number. It's 954-894-8000. Or you can email me directly at geisinger@eisingerlaw.com. And we service basically the entire state. We have a office in Hollywood, Florida as our main office. We have a satellite office in Gainesville, where we serve many communities up in the Alachua County area. But we have associations all throughout the state, and the advancement of Zoom and whatnot has really helped us expand, so we can really serve any community in Florida, anywhere.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being on True Law Stories, Greg.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you having us.
And thank you all for taking these stories on the road with you. This has been Ian Garlic and True Law Stories.